Brenda stood by the kitchen counter, her voice flat as she mentioned dinner with another man. "It's just dinner, Dale," she'd said, like an accountant reading off a ledger. My stomach dropped, leaving a hollow space where 30 years of trust had been. The casualness in her tone was a hammer blow, dismissing our life. "My future. Nothing will change," she added, her eyes avoiding mine. The air in the kitchen was thick, not with cooking smells, but with the dust of something collapsing. I had asked Brenda about her plans for the evening, a routine question, expecting a routine answer. Her reply, however, had been anything but. She mentioned dinner with someone, a new acquaintance she'd made through her volunteering. The details were sparse, offered with a casualness that grated against my every instinct. "Just dinner, Dale," she repeated, noticing the silence that had followed her statement. Her gaze was fixed on the countertop, avoiding mine. "It's nothing to worry about, just a way to expand my social circle." My mind worked to process this, sifting through the implications. 30 years, built brick by brick, suddenly felt like a facade. "A social circle," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You're going on a date, Brenda. Call it what it is." She finally looked up, her expression a careful blank. "It's not a date. It's dinner. Why are you making such a fuss?" Her tone was dismissive, an attempt to minimize the situation, to shrink it into something insignificant I was overreacting to. But the facts were clear. She had plans with another man, plans she had withheld until directly questioned. "My feelings have changed, Brenda," I stated, the words leaving my mouth with a certainty that surprised even me. It was a factual observation, not an accusation. "The foundation had shifted." She shook her head, a practiced gesture of exasperation. "This doesn't have to change anything, Dale. We can talk about this. We can resolve whatever issues you think we have." Her voice was even almost soothing, as if discussing a minor household repair. The assumption that this was merely a problem to be solved, rather than a fundamental breach, was telling. I looked at her, then at the door leading out of our home. "Everything has changed." The statement hung in the air, undeniable. I turned, walked past her, past the photographs on the wall of us, of our daughters, and out of the house. The engine of my truck started with a familiar rumble, a small comfort in the sudden chaos. I drove, not knowing where to go, until the thought of Emily, our eldest, formed in my mind. She was practical, grounded. I pulled into Emily's driveway, the familiar 2-story house a beacon. The porch light was on. She opened the door, a warm smile on her face. "Dad? What a surprise. Come in. Gus is just putting the kids to bed." She ushered me inside, oblivious to the tremor I carried. We sat at her kitchen table, a place where countless family discussions had unfolded. I explained it to her plainly, fact by fact. Brenda's confession of dinner with another man. My departure. The cold, logical progression of events. Emily listened, her initial warmth slowly replaced by a growing bewilderment. Then shock. Her jaw tightened as I finished. "I need to call her," Emily said, pulling out her phone. "This isn't right." She dialed Brenda, holding the phone away from her ear, the quiet buzz of the ring filling the space. "Mom? Dad's here. He told me about your dinner plans. Where are you?" I watched Emily's face as Brenda spoke. Her expression shifted from apprehension to disbelief, then anger. "No, Mom, he's not with me. He's sitting right here. Why are you lying?" Emily's voice was firm, cutting through the receiver. "You're at a restaurant with Dad? That's not true." Her eyes darted to me, then back to the phone. "This is unbelievable." She disconnected the call with a sharp tap, her hand trembling. The phone dropped to the table. Emily stared at it. Then, at me, tears welling in her eyes. A sob escaped her, and she buried her face in her hands. I reached across the table, my hand finding her arm. "I'm sorry, Em," I said, my voice rough. "I'm just floundering." The word felt inadequate, but it was the truth. My life had become unmoored. She wiped her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "We need to tell Karen." Emily stood up, her earlier shock hardening into resolve. "She needs to know." Karen arrived 20 minutes later, her face etched with a mixture of skepticism and concern. She walked in, her purse still on her shoulder. "What's going on, Em?" "Your call sounded urgent." We repeated the facts, laying them out for her. Karen's initial disbelief quickly gave way to a quiet understanding as she processed the objective reality of the situation. Her eyes met mine, then Emily's. The gravity settled between us. Gus, Emily's husband, appeared, having put the children down. His presence was calm, steady. "We should go to the lake house," he suggested, his voice low. "Get some space. Think things through." It was a logical next step, a place away, a neutral ground to process what had just occurred, to begin investigating the implications of Brenda's choices. We gathered a few things. The drive was silent, the silence heavy with the unspoken consequences that were just beginning to unfold. The lake house was silent, a stark contrast to the churning in my mind. Emily and I sat on the small, screened-in porch. The only sounds the distant lapping of waves and the chirping of crickets. We talked, not about feelings, but about possibilities. "What do you think she'll do?" Emily asked, her voice quiet. "It's hard to say," I responded, my gaze fixed on the dark water. "She'll either deny it further, or she'll try to rationalize it. She might even attempt to turn it around, make it my fault somehow." I was thinking strategically, trying to map out her potential moves like a chess game. If I confront her directly without more information, she'll likely deflect. She's good at that. We discussed how Brenda might react if I pressed for details, if I revealed what I knew about her lies. She could become defensive, angry, Emily offered. Or she might play the victim, say she's unhappy. "Unhappy," I muttered, the word echoing with a hollow sound. That's her go-to when she wants to avoid accountability. I considered my own options. Staying silent was not one of them. Confrontation, but with what leverage? The current facts were thin, easily dismissed by someone determined to obscure the truth. Sleep that night was a series of fragmented images and half-formed thoughts. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, the old house creaking around me. The betrayal was a dull ache, but more immediate was the analytical puzzle of it. How long had this been going on? Who was this man? What did it mean for everything I thought I knew? My mind meticulously replayed the last few weeks, searching for discrepancies, for details I had overlooked. The next morning, Emily suggested breakfast. "There's a diner down the road," she said. "We could use some real coffee." It was an attempt at normalcy, a brief pause from the escalating crisis. The diner was busy, the clatter of plates and cheerful chatter, a stark contrast to the somber mood at our table. We ordered eggs and bacon, talking about the weather, about Emily's kids, about anything that wasn't Brenda. It was a temporary reprieve, a shared moment of pretending that the world hadn't just tipped on its axis. After dropping Emily back at her house, I returned to the lake house. The quiet was louder now, the isolation more pronounced. I settled onto the porch again, watching the small boats trace white lines across the blue lake. Each one was heading somewhere, purposeful. I felt adrift. This situation, I decided, required a methodical approach. Emotions would only cloud judgment. I needed facts, not feelings. I started to review the past few months, running a mental timeline. Brenda's routine had subtly shifted. She'd always been active, but lately, her evenings had become more occupied. Volunteer work, she'd called it. A new committee, new responsibilities. There were more nights she was out late. Explaining it away with a vague committee meeting ran long, Or we had a lot to get through. I remembered her coming home, sometimes a little flushed, a little too quick to say she was tired and head to bed. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it beyond a passing thought about her increased dedication. Now, these details stood out like flares in the dark. Then there was her phone. She used to leave it lying around, face up. Lately, it was almost always face down. She started taking calls in another room, or her voice would drop to an almost whisper if I entered the room while she was on the phone. Just checking in with a friend, she'd say, too quickly. The privacy settings on her tablet had changed too. Things I'd noticed, but never truly questioned. And the comments about needing space. She'd started using that phrase more frequently, especially after minor disagreements. "I just need some space, Dale," she'd say. Retreating to her craft room, sometimes for hours. I'd interpreted it as a desire for personal time, a need for individuality within our long marriage. Now, it felt like preparation, a gradual psychological distancing. My objective was clear. I needed concrete information. This wasn't a domestic squabble. This was an investigation. I began to form a mental list of questions, pushing the pain of betrayal to a corner of my mind. Who was this person? How long had this been going on? Where exactly were they meeting? What did he do? Did anyone else know? The need for accurate, verifiable data was paramount. I considered the options. Confronting Brenda directly would likely yield more obfuscation. I needed independent verification. Professional help, I concluded, would be the most efficient route. A private investigator could uncover the facts without tipping my hand. Legal counsel would also be necessary. This was no longer just about my marriage. It was about the logical dissolution of it. My next steps needed to be precise, evidence-based. Returning to the house felt different. The air was heavier, charged with an unspoken tension, at least for me. Brenda was in the living room, reading a magazine, her posture relaxed. Her demeanor showed no visible signs of the previous night's confrontation, no hint of the lies she'd told Emily. It was as if our exchange had never happened. Her composure was a data point. She was either genuinely oblivious to the severity of the situation or expertly feigning ignorance. Later, while she was out running errands, I made my initial moves. My first stop was her car. I checked the odometer, noting the number, then carefully examined the gas receipts in the console. There were no obvious anomalies, but the mileage alone wouldn't tell the whole story without a baseline. It was a preliminary check, part of the wider net I was casting. Next, I moved to her office, a small room off the kitchen. Her personal planner lay open on her desk. I scanned the entries, looking for recurring names, unusual appointments, or blocks of time that seemed deliberately vague. Most entries were for volunteer work, doctor's appointments, or lunch with friends, all seemingly innocuous. However, a few evenings were simply marked dinner with no name, or just meeting, which now stood out. The meticulousness of her other entries made these omissions glaring. I then accessed our online bank statements and credit card activity. Joint accounts made this straightforward. I scrolled through months of transactions, looking for anything out of place. Most charges were familiar. Groceries, utilities, department stores. Then, I found it. A series of charges, several $100s each, from a restaurant I didn't recognize, the Willow Creek Bistro. It was an upscale place, known for its intimate atmosphere. The charges were always on evenings when Brenda had claimed to be at volunteer meetings or out with friends. One charge dated back 3 months. This wasn't a new development. The evidence was accumulating, piece by piece. My next step was clear. Professional assistance. I went to my study, closed the door, and opened my laptop. I searched for Private Investigator, Midwest. Discretion was paramount. I sifted through websites, looking for firms that emphasized confidentiality and a methodical approach. I found one, Midwest Investigations, that seemed to fit the criteria. Their online testimonials spoke of professionalism and thoroughness. I made an anonymous call from my cell phone, identifying myself only as Dale. The receptionist was polite, efficient. I briefly explained my need for discreet information gathering regarding a personal matter. An initial consultation was scheduled for 2 days later, at their downtown office. Over the next 2 days, I methodically gathered documents. Our marriage certificate, the deeds to our house and the lake house, copies of recent tax returns. I also compiled a timeline of Brenda's recent suspicious behaviors, dates of late arrivals, phone secrecy, and the unusual credit card charges were all noted, cross-referenced with her planner entries where possible. It was a cold, clinical summary, devoid of emotional language. The meeting with Mr. Henderson at Midwest Investigations was precisely as I'd hoped. He was a man in his late 50s, with a calm, observant gaze and an air of quiet competence. His office was neat, functional, with no superfluous decorations. I laid out my case, presenting the timeline and the financial records without embellishment. Mr. Henderson listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, making notes on a pad. When I finished, he summarized the facts back to me, confirming his understanding. "So, Mr. Peterson," he began, "you suspect your wife is engaged in an extramarital affair, and you require verifiable evidence to proceed." "That is correct," I affirmed. "I need facts. Dates, times, locations, and the identity of the individual involved." He then outlined his process. Surveillance, photographic evidence, background checks if necessary. He discussed the costs transparently, detailing hourly rates and expected expenses. "We operate strictly within legal boundaries, Mr. Peterson. Our evidence will be admissible should you choose to pursue legal action." I authorized him to begin. The signing of the contract felt strangely detached, like signing off on a business acquisition. It was a transaction, a necessary step to untangle a complex problem. The emotional pain was there, a dull throb beneath the surface, but I pushed it down. This was not about emotion, it was about precision. Later, I called Emily and Karen. "I'm dealing with things," I told them, keeping my voice even. "I've started the process of finding out exactly what's going on." I offered no details, knowing they would understand that dealing with things meant a logical, structured approach, not an emotional breakdown. My resolve solidified. Facts above all else. 3 days later, Mr. Henderson's first report arrived via secure email. It was a concise document, mostly photographs and timestamps. The lead image showed Brenda, smiling, across a table from a man at the Willow Creek Bistro. The time and date matched one of the suspicious credit card charges I had found. I zoomed in on the man's face. He looked familiar. A moment later, recognition clicked. George Miller. A real estate agent I'd seen at a few local business association events over the years. We'd exchanged pleasantries, nothing more. He was married, I recalled, with a family. The fact solidified the nature of Brenda's deception. The report continued, detailing their 2-hour dinner, their departure together, and subsequent tracking of Miller's vehicle to a secluded, rental cabin on the outskirts of town. More photos documented their entrance and exit, hours apart. The evidence was irrefutable. Mr. Henderson's team had also pulled phone records. The volume of calls between Brenda's number and George Miller's number was significant. Dozens of calls over the past 2 months, often late at night. These were not casual conversations. A deeper dive into online activity revealed another layer. Using specialized software, Mr. Henderson's team located a social media profile Brenda maintained under the alias Brenda K. It was a private profile, hidden from public search, accessible only through direct link or mutual connection. The content was damning. Flirtatious exchanges, intimate jokes, and explicit plans for weekend getaways with an account identified as G. Miller. The language was saccharine, sickeningly sweet, a stark contrast to the distant Brenda I had known. The discovery of the alias account prompted another line of inquiry. Brenda had always been careful with her money, but recently, her spending had become opaque. I remembered a set of antique pearl earrings, a gift from my mother, that Brenda rarely wore but kept in a specific jewelry box. I checked the box. They were gone, and a diamond pendant I'd given her for our 15th anniversary. I found old jewelry store receipts tucked away in a safe deposit box. With these, I made a discreet call to the store where the items were purchased. Their records confirmed what I suspected. Brenda had indeed sold several pieces of jewelry, including the pearl earrings and the diamond pendant, over the past 4 months. Each sale occurred on a date close to one of the unusual expenses I'd noted earlier, or preceding a period where Brenda had made claims of needing extra cash for a project. The sums were substantial. The total proceeds from these sales, according to the store, exceeded $15,000. I then checked Brenda's individual bank account, an account she maintained separately for craft supplies and personal spending. I found a cash deposit, matching the sum from the jewelry sales, made just days after the largest sale. This wasn't merely infidelity, it was financial betrayal. Just as I was processing this, another email arrived from Mr. Henderson. Brenda had taken an unscheduled trip out of town with George Miller. The report detailed their drive several hours north to a resort town, their check-in at a boutique hotel, and their activities over a 2-day period. This was not a casual dinner. This was a sustained, deliberate affair. That evening, Brenda was home. She was making dinner, humming to herself. I walked into the kitchen, my voice calm, almost detached. "Brenda," I began, "have you seen those pearl earrings? The ones my mother gave me?" She paused, turning from the stove, a slight frown on her face. "Oh, those? I haven't worn them in ages. They're probably in my jewelry box, or maybe I put them in the safe for safekeeping." She didn't miss a beat. The deflection was smooth, practiced. She offered no hint of panic, no flicker of guilt, just a calm, dismissive lie. I looked at her, memorizing the casualness of her deceit. "Right," I said, and walked out. The emotional distance within me had solidified into a cold, hard shell. There was no room for sentiment now, only the objective pursuit of the full truth. I opened a new folder on my computer, password protected, and began meticulously documenting every piece of evidence. The surveillance reports, the photos, the phone records, the social media screenshots, the jewelry store receipts, the bank statements. Each item was labeled, dated, and cross-referenced. This was no longer just about pain, it was about precision, about building an irrefutable case. With the file of evidence complete, my next logical step was legal counsel. I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Schmidt, a family lawyer recommended by a colleague. His office was understated, efficient. I laid out the binder of documents, reports, and photographs on his polished mahogany table. He reviewed everything methodically, his expression unreadable. "This is comprehensive, Mr. Peterson," he stated, closing the binder. "The evidence of marital misconduct is substantial and well documented. This provides a clear path forward for divorce proceedings, including grounds for infidelity and potential financial impropriety." He outlined the legal implications, discussed asset division, and child support, and confirmed that the evidence would be admissible. The conversation was purely procedural, a dissection of our life into legal categories. The decision was made. I would confront Brenda. This wasn't about an emotional plea or an argument. It was about presenting facts and stating my position. I waited for a day when Emily and Karen were both busy, ensuring they wouldn't be present in the house. The atmosphere needed to be contained, controlled. "Brenda," I said, finding her in the living room, "we need to talk." Formally, my voice was even, devoid of inflection. She looked up from her book, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "About what, Dale? I thought we were past this." Sit down, I instructed, indicating the armchair opposite the sofa where I sat, the evidence binder resting on the coffee table between us. She complied, her posture stiffening. I opened the binder to the first set of surveillance photos. These were taken by Mr. Henderson's team, I began, pushing them across the table. This is you, Brenda, with George Miller, at the Willow Creek Bistro. She picked up the photos, her brow furrowed. This is absurd, Dale. It's just dinner. He's a friend. We've been discussing some volunteer work. She attempted the familiar minimizing tactic, but her eyes darted away from mine. A tell. Harmless, I stated, a rhetorical question. I then turned to the next page, revealing the photographs of them entering and leaving the rental cabin. And this? Also for volunteer work, Brenda? Her denial faltered. Her face flushed, a hint of anger surfacing. You hired a private investigator? Are you insane? This is an invasion of privacy. This is an investigation into deception, I corrected, my voice steady. I pushed the printouts of the phone records across the table. Dozens of calls, often late at night. Does your volunteer committee require this level of communication, Brenda? She picked up the phone records, her hand trembling slightly. Her eyes scanned the list of calls. Her defiance began to crack, replaced by a defensive anger. You went through my phone records? What kind of husband does that? A husband seeking the truth when his wife is systematically lying to him, I replied. I then presented the screenshots from her hidden social media profile. The flirtatious messages. The explicit plans. Her alias, Brenda K. She threw the papers back onto the table. That's personal. You have no right. Her voice was rising, but it was edged with a desperate quality. And you had no right to deliberately deceive me, Brenda. For months. While selling off family heirlooms. I paused, allowing the weight of that statement to settle. Then, I slid the jewelry store receipts and the bank statements documenting the cash deposit across to her. The pearl earrings, the diamond pendant, $15,000. Where did that money go, Brenda? She looked at the receipts, then at the bank statement, her shoulders slumping. I needed some money for myself, for my own things. You always control everything, Dale. I needed some independence. It was a partial admission, but still minimizing the true nature of her actions. The affair, as she still called it in her mind, was secondary to her perceived need for financial autonomy. Independence, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Or financial preparation for a new life. One without me? I leaned forward slightly. Brenda, I'm filing for divorce. Based on these documented facts, on your deliberate deceit and financial misconduct, her face went pale. The anger drained out, replaced by a raw fear. Divorce? Dale, no. Please. We can fix this. 30 years, Dale. We have a family. This doesn't have to end. She reached across the table, but I pulled back. It ended when you chose to lie, Brenda. It ended when you chose George Miller. It ended when you chose to sell off my mother's jewelry. These are not minor issues. These are fundamental breaches of trust. Deliberate acts of betrayal. There is nothing to fix. The room fell silent, the air heavy with unspoken consequences. Brenda sat, visibly shaken, her pleas extinguished. I, on the other hand, felt only a hollow completion. No triumph, no anger, just the quiet satisfaction of having taken a necessary, logical step. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The divorce papers were filed, citing irreconcilable differences and, specifically, undisclosed marital misconduct. It was a cold, formal step, devoid of sentiment. The legal system, I realized, was designed for this kind of precise, methodical disentanglement. Brenda was served 2 days later. The aftermath was immediate and predictable. Her calls were a mix of anger and renewed pleas. all of which I filtered through Mr. Schmidt. My lawyer advised me to limit direct contact, to keep all communications strictly professional and through legal channels. This was a battle of facts, not feelings. I began the arduous process of asset valuation. Our house, the lake house, investment accounts, retirement funds, everything had to be meticulously documented. Financial disclosure forms required a complete inventory of our lives, laid bare for legal scrutiny. This level of detail, I knew, would expose any further financial machinations Brenda might have attempted. I met with Emily and Karen again, this time to deliver the news of the divorce. I presented it factually, reiterating the evidence without emotional embellishment. Emily reacted with a quiet devastation, her shoulders slumping as I spoke. I can't believe Mom would do this, she whispered. Her voice barely audible. The truth was a heavy burden for her, a disruption to her entire understanding of our family. Karen, however, reacted with a different kind of intensity. She lied to all of us, Dad. Repeatedly. And then tried to lie to me and Em about where you were. Her anger was palpable, directed squarely at Brenda's deceit. How could she do this after all these years? As expected, Brenda quickly attempted to manipulate them. She called them, painting me as rigid, unforgiving, a man who had suddenly decided to abandon his family without reason. She cast herself as the victim, misunderstood, and unfairly accused. But my daughters, armed with the precise details I had provided, saw through her narrative. They had seen the evidence, the cold facts, and Brenda's attempts to deflect and deny had failed. She's saying you're being unreasonable, Dad, Emily reported, her voice strained. She says you're trying to ruin her. I am stating facts and taking appropriate legal action, I corrected her gently. There's a difference. I made sure they both knew that counseling was available to them, for free, should they need to talk through the emotional fallout. Their well-being was my priority. Separate from the legal battle, a few weeks later, Mr. Schmidt received an initial settlement proposal from Brenda's lawyer. It was a standard opening gambit, heavily skewed in her favor, a clear attempt to minimize her accountability for the marital misconduct. Mr. Schmidt reviewed it with a cynical eye. This is just their starting position, Dale. We'll counter. During the ongoing financial disclosures, I discovered another move by Brenda. She had attempted to transfer a significant sum from one of our joint savings accounts into a separate account I didn't recognize. One she had opened shortly after Mr. Henderson began his investigation. It was a desperate, transparent attempt to hide assets. I immediately informed Mr. Schmidt. His response was swift and decisive. We'll file an injunction. That will freeze all marital assets until the court can rule on their equitable division. The legal action was filed within hours. Brenda's attempt to circumvent the system was blocked. The divorce proceedings became more contentious. Brenda's lawyer, now facing evidence of both infidelity and attempted financial concealment, began to fight harder, knowing their client's position was weak. Every financial discrepancy, every unexplained expenditure, became a point of contention. It ceased to be about emotion. For me, at least. It was a strategic game, a logical progression of moves and counter-moves, designed to achieve a fair and factual outcome. I observed Brenda's desperation grow. Her calls became more erratic, her voice sometimes shaking with frustration. Her control over the narrative, over her own actions, was diminishing. The facts I had meticulously gathered were stripping away her ability to deceive, leaving her exposed. There was no joy in this, no sense of victory, only the cold, hard reality of consequence unfolding. The divorce proceedings, now focused on the financial aspects, demanded a deeper dive. Mr. Schmidt and I meticulously went through years of bank statements, credit card records, and investment portfolios. It was a painstaking process, but it quickly yielded results. The unauthorized jewelry sales were not an isolated incident. We uncovered several smaller, more subtle financial transactions over the past few years. Unexplained withdrawals, transfers to accounts Brenda claimed were for charitable donations but had no clear beneficiary, and cash deposits that didn't align with her declared income. Mr. Schmidt recommended bringing in forensic accountants. They were specialists in tracing money, unearthing financial discrepancies that a layman might miss. Their investigation was thorough, a surgical dissection of our shared financial life. Their report confirmed my worst suspicions. Funds from Brenda's hidden accounts, including the proceeds from the jewelry sales, had been consistently transferred to various shell accounts and, ultimately, to support George Miller's struggling real estate ventures. It became clear that this affair was not merely a romantic entanglement, it was a significant financial arrangement, a systematic drain on our marital assets. The realization hit me with a cold certainty. Brenda wasn't just seeking intimacy. She was funding Miller's life, using our money to prop up his failures. It added another layer of calculated betrayal, turning a personal slight into a criminal enterprise. During her deposition, Brenda attempted to deflect. She launched into attacks on my character, portraying me as controlling, emotionally distant, and obsessed with money. Dale was always so rigid, she claimed, her voice theatrical. He never understood my need for independence. But when my lawyer presented the banking records, the wire transfers, the documented flow of funds to George Miller's business accounts, her accusations dissolved. The facts were immutable. She had no counter. A surprising development occurred when George Miller's wife became aware of his involvement. It wasn't through me, but through documents leaked inadvertently, I believe from court filings. The news of his affair and the financial implications spread through their social circles. The ripple effect of Brenda's choices was starting to impact others. Then, an anonymous tip arrived, an email sent to my lawyer's office. The sender, identifying themselves only as a concerned acquaintance, mentioned that Brenda and George had been looking at properties together, discussing plans for a new business venture. Not just a romantic fantasy, but a concrete plan, a future built on stolen resources. I immediately instructed Mr. Henderson to investigate these property leads. His team tracked down several properties in a neighboring county that Brenda and George had visited, even making initial inquiries about purchasing. This wasn't merely infidelity anymore, it was a full-blown scheme, a planned dissolution of our shared life for their mutual financial benefit. The scale of the deception was far greater than I had initially grasped. My emotional response remained muted. There was no rage, no heartbreak, just a grim determination, a methodical drive to uncover every single thread of their deception. The complexity of the financial web they had woven solidified my resolve. This was a war, fought with documents and disclosures. Brenda's legal team was visibly struggling. Each piece of financial evidence we presented chipped away at her credibility, making her emotional appeals seem hollow. Emily and Karen, witnessing this slow, public unraveling, grew increasingly distant from their mother. They saw the depth of the deceit, the calculated nature of her actions, and the impact it had on their father. The disillusionment was visible in their strained silences. To prevent any further asset depletion, Mr. Schmidt moved quickly. We secured additional restraining orders on specific financial accounts, effectively freezing any funds Brenda might still attempt to divert. The net was closing, slowly but inexorably, around all the hidden financial threads she had spun. The interim order came through, a cold, calculated strike. All of Brenda's assets were temporarily frozen, a legal net preventing any further financial maneuverings. The weight of the forensic accounting report, combined with the documented perjury in her depositions, left the court no choice. The legal repercussions for Brenda were mounting, shifting from marital misconduct to actual financial crime. The fallout wasn't limited to our direct divorce. George Miller's business partner, faced with the public revelation of Miller's affair and his financially dubious dealings, initiated his own legal action. Miller's real estate business, already struggling, was now in freefall, burdened by the weight of scandal and legal entanglement. The consequences were spreading, a logical chain reaction. The truth of Brenda's actions, initially whispered, became common knowledge within our small community. The details, filtered through court documents and town gossip, painted a clear picture of her deceit. I observed the shift in how people treated her, the averted gazes at the grocery store, the quick goodbyes from former friends. It wasn't a triumph for me, but a cold satisfaction in the natural justice of it. Her social standing, once a carefully constructed facade, crumbled, exposing the reality beneath. Emily and Karen, now fully aware of the extent of their mother's deception and the financial betrayal, confronted Brenda directly. "How could you do this, Mom?" Emily had asked, her voice cracking. "To Dad? To us?" Karen's disappointment was sharper. "You risked everything. For this." Their words carried more weight than any legal document, a direct consequence of Brenda's choices. Brenda, cornered and exposed, made a final, desperate attempt at reconciliation. She came to the house, unannounced, her eyes red, her posture defeated. "Dale," she began, her voice raw. "I was wrong. About everything. I understand now. I made terrible mistakes. Please give us another chance. I'll do anything." She admitted full guilt, acknowledging the depth of her deceit. I listened, my expression neutral. Her confession was a fact, noted, but it came too late. "I acknowledge what you're saying, Brenda," I responded, my voice calm, unwavering. "But my decision is final. There is no going back from this." The trust was obliterated, the foundation destroyed beyond repair. There was nothing left to rebuild. The divorce settlement was negotiated over several weeks. It was fair, but firm. Mr. Schmidt, armed with the forensic evidence, ensured that Brenda's financial misconduct was fully accounted for, protecting our shared assets and, most importantly, securing the financial future of our daughters. The settlement reflected her culpability, preventing her from profiting from her deceit. The court formally dissolved the marriage on a Tuesday morning. The judge's gavel strike marked the legal end of 3 decades. Afterward, a profound emptiness settled over me. The logical conclusion had been reached, the battle won. But there was no sense of victory, only a quiet void. The purpose that had driven me, the methodical pursuit of truth, was now gone. I found myself spending more time with Gus, Emily's husband. We'd work on small projects at the lake house, fish, or just sit in companionable silence. His quiet presence and the simple routines offered a sense of grounding, a return to normalcy. The emotional toll of the protracted battle, which I had suppressed for so long, began to surface. I started therapy, a logical step suggested by Mr. Schmidt to process the complex layers of betrayal and loss. It wasn't about finding blame or rehashing anger, but about understanding the impact, learning to live with the new reality. Slowly, I began to reconnect with old friends, ones I had neglected during the marriage. I picked up forgotten hobbies, like woodworking, finding solace in the tangible creation of something new. The house, once filled with unspoken tension, was now simply quiet. No longer the silence of suspicion, but the silence of a life being rebuilt, piece by logical piece. The lake house, once a weekend escape, became my permanent residence. The city house, a relic of a life that no longer existed, was sold. I found comfort in the solitude of the lake, the predictable rhythm of the water, the unchanging horizon. It suited the new routine I established. Early mornings, solitary walks, the methodical organization of my new space. Each task, no matter how small, brought a sense of quiet accomplishment. Emily and Karen became regular visitors. They brought their children, filling the lake house with laughter and the chaos of family life, a welcome contrast to the quiet. Our relationships deepened, forged in the crucible of shared difficulty. They saw me not as a victim, but as someone who had navigated a profound betrayal with quiet strength. They saw the logical choices, the unwavering pursuit of facts, and it resonated with them. Brenda moved away, out of state, her new life, a vague concept, largely unknown, and, truthfully, of little interest to me. The last I heard, she was working a clerical job, a far cry from the socialite she had once been. The silence from her was a relief, a sign that the ties had finally, completely severed. Updates about George Miller occasionally reached me, usually through Mr. Henderson's office, as the legal ramifications of his actions continued to unfold. His business had collapsed, his reputation was ruined, and his marriage had dissolved under the weight of his own deceit. The consequences, for both of them, were stark and far-reaching. I spent hours on the porch, watching the boats go by, reflecting on the nature of trust and betrayal. There was no bitterness in these reflections, only a cool, analytical understanding of how easily a carefully constructed life could be undermined. Trust, I realized, was not a given. It was a constant, deliberate choice by both parties. Once broken, it left permanent scars, even when meticulously cleaned and healed. I found a quiet contentment in rebuilding my life, on my terms. There were no more expectations to manage, no more facades to maintain. I worked more, dedicating myself to my architectural projects, finding renewed purpose in the concrete designs and predictable structures. It was a tangible contrast to the crumbling foundation of my past. My daughters, too, navigated their own futures, shaped by the experience. They learned to question, to seek truth, and to value integrity. They understood that appearances could be deceiving, and that true strength lay in facing difficult realities. They grew, as I did, in unforeseen ways. Sometimes, an old memory would surface, a shared laugh, a family vacation. I would revisit it, not with nostalgia or pain, but through a new lens of cold, objective understanding. I could see the subtle cues I had missed, the gradual shifts in Brenda's behavior, the moments when the cracks first appeared. The investigation, I realized, had taught me more about myself, about my own assumptions and blind spots, than it ever did about Brenda. It had been a painful, necessary education. The logical pursuit of truth, I understood, brought consequences far beyond legal papers and financial settlements. It brought a profound change in how I viewed the world, how I interacted with people, and how I valued authenticity. I accepted this permanent change, the new shape of my life, as a fixed reality. Some things, once broken, simply could not be fully mended. They could only be acknowledged, understood, and built around. The Midwestern landscape outside my window remained constant, steadfast in its rhythms. It reflected, in its quiet, enduring strength, the man who now looked out at it, a man who had faced the facts, however brutal, and had chosen to stand firm.